years ago, Portugal decided to decriminalize all drugs, soft drugs and hard drugs, in order to combat their substance abuse issues.
Right.
Okay, so that's a really interesting way to handle it. Okay?
Well, look, if they're decriminalizing and they already had really growing substance, it must have been, it's right now you're going to tell me it's out of control, right? Because once you decriminalize, oh my God, everybody's going to take drugs.
Drug use actually decreased. In fact, I know, it's not surprising to us, but it is surprising to a lot of other people, especially those who are for the war on drugs. But what's really interesting is they totally shifted their policy from focusing on people who use drugs as criminals and treating them as people who have an illness that need help. So new research shows that there was a 63% increase in the number of Portuguese drug users who went into treatment.
To get better.
To get better.
And that might have contributed to why they have less drug users in the country now, why the overall drug rate has gone down, because they're getting treatment instead of getting their ass thrown in jail. And by the way, taxpayers paying a lot of money to keep them in jail. So that's also freed up some money for the government as well. Furthermore, 499% increase in the amount of drugs seized, which is really interesting.
Yes, because look, they did decriminalize drug use. However, they did not decriminalize selling drugs illegally. So if you are a drug dealer, law enforcement is now focusing on catching your ass. They're not focusing on people who are addicted to drugs.
See, I didn't expect that, to be honest with you, right? But fivefold increase because they're not wasting their time on the users anymore, right? That's part of the reason why. Okay, when are we going to learn the lesson? Making it illegal doesn't make it any better, it makes it worse. No ands, ifs, or buts. The proof is incontrovertible. You do not harm the country by legalizing drugs. You actually decrease drug usage. You decrease the amount of taxes that we pay to keep people in jail for no good reason. You decrease the amount of disease. You decrease the amount of crime. One last thing. If you're a conservative, you shouldn't want big government telling you what you can and can't do, right? And here's another thing. We can tax the drugs, and then that helps us with our deficit problems. Whether you're a libertarian, a conservative, or a liberal, you should agree with this. And the facts are completely on our side. We've got to change momentum in this country on this. The drug war is killing us. It's killing the countries around us. And it makes no sense, and it's counterproductive. I got to say, end of this.
Joining me now is Harvard economist Jeffrey Miron. Thanks so much for being with us this morning.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
There seems to be a difference in people's minds about the legalization of marijuana, which seems to enjoy broader support than the legalization of all drugs. Why do you say just legalizing marijuana is not enough?
Well, legalizing marijuana would certainly be a very useful first step. But a lot of the violence that we're seeing, a lot of the underground market, is not related to marijuana. It's related to these other drugs. So if we were only to do marijuana, we would only have a small impact on all the violence, on all the corruption, on all the disruption of other countries that's caused by U.S. prohibition of drugs and the U.S. forcing prohibition of drugs on other countries.
This is what I want to ask you about. We talk about what's going on at the U.S.-Mexico border. We've talked about the growing violence in some measure because Mexico's trying to crack down a little bit more on these cartels. Can you explain, as you compare what our drug policy is to prohibition and why you feel that, trying to make alcohol illegal failed and we're learning the hard lessons about trying to make drugs illegal?
I mean, any attempt to drive a market underground, to ban it, to prohibit it, means that it may shrink a little bit, but it's mainly just going to become an underground market. That's what we saw for alcohol in the 20s and 30s. That's what we've seen for drugs. That's what we've seen in other societies and other times for gambling, for prostitution, for all these things. And in underground markets, people resolve their disputes with violence because they can't use lawyers and courts and advertising. And so guns are the only logical alternative, and we observe that over and over again with any kind of prohibition.
I mean, would you go to a doctor who said, I just occasionally use heroin on the weekends? I mean, would you get a surgery from a doctor like that? Would you want your kids going to nursery school where their teachers say, I do some meth and try to keep my weight down?
The fact is that we're all doing that now. We just don't know it. Okay, we are going to doctors who may be alcoholics, who may be misusing currently illegal drugs. Some of the teachers of our kids are doing all those things on the weekends, but it's just been pushed underground. So by bringing it above ground, we're more likely to know about it. We're more likely to be able to use things like drug testing procedures to address the irresponsible uses of drugs on or off the job. Pretending that we're getting rid of it with prohibition is clearly not changing the fact. We know that millions and millions of people are doing these things every day, but we're pretending that it's not there. It's already a problem.
I know that, you know, the article that you wrote, and it was very thoughtful. I'm playing devil's advocate here with you, but how do we find a way to tax or get income off of what's still going to be illegal, right, internationally? I mean, if people are bringing drugs over here illegally, even though we may say they're legal here, how do we control all of that traffic? How do we control all of that revenue that's coming in and find a way to tax it and have it work?
Well, if we were to actually legalize it, I have no doubt that most of the rest of the world would immediately legalize as well. The U.S. historically has been the biggest advocate of prohibition. We, in fact, forced it on the rest of the world in 1919 as a condition of signing the treaty that ended World War I. I'm sure that lots of Latin American governments would be delighted to legalize because a huge amount of the corruption and violence in their countries is due to U.S. pressure to maintain this policy.
Very interesting, and I encourage people to read your article as well. Jeffrey Mirren, Harvard University economist. Thanks for being with us this morning.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Well, I think the war on drugs in general is just a total disaster. We spend $40 billion a year, and all it does is it enhances the drug dealers. I mean, prohibition for alcohol was a disaster, and now we've done the same thing over and over again. You're only talking about going back to 1937. You know, prior to 1937, the federal government wasn't involved. That was when the first tax was placed on it. And I just think that the states that legalize it, if any conservative ever considered states' rights, they ought to under these conditions, because these states legalize it. I'm a physician, and I can vouch for the fact that some very sick people benefit from marijuana. Sick people that have AIDS and cancer can use marijuana and benefit by it, and then compassionate conservatives come along and they arrest them under federal law. They overrule state law, and they put sick people in prison for this. It makes no sense, and I don't know why we should be such strong supporters of Roosevelt's position to go ahead and tax and then eventually lead to making it illegal. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I believe in a free society and making freedom of choice.
All right, on this whole drug legalization thing, I'm so past it, man. I went from undecided only about like a month ago. Like I was leaning, I was gathering more and more evidence, to now I'm full-blown 100% legalize everything. This whole, you know, oh no, we're going to win the war on drugs is so profoundly stupid. We're not going to win dick, okay? We're not going to win the war on drugs. People aren't going to stop magically taking drugs. And, you know, the more I read, which is something that should have been profoundly obvious from the get-go, and like I got it before, don't get me wrong, it's not like I'm blown away by it, but now it seems overwhelming to me. It's obviously just like Prohibition. And in Prohibition, we had out-of-control gangs. That's how the gangsters started in America. And then we do Prohibition on drugs, like marijuana, and we have out-of-control gangs. Well, not just in America now, all over the world. It's a stupid, stupid policy.